International Criminal Court charges Iranian national for 1988 massacre. So, the massacre occurred in Iran, but on June 22nd, the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in Sweden began the trial for an Iranian national. The unnamed defendant is suspected of playing a vital role in the series of political killings in 1988. The trial is slated to begin on August 10th. Many news agencies refer to the Iranian national as 60-year-old Hamid Nouri. In the late 1980s, Nouri was the assistant to a deputy prosecutor in the Gohardasht Prison in Karaj, where many prisoners were subjected to torture and inhumane treatment. Nouri affirms that he is innocent of all the charges. In an interview with a local news agency in Sweden, Nouri's lawyer, Lars Hultgren, insisted that Nouri is innocent, claiming that, quote, they have taken the wrong guy. Hultgren added that Nouri was in Sweden at the time to visit his family. The Office of the Prosecutor confirmed that Nouri's charges were for his time as the assistant to the deputy prosecutor. So I wanted to cover this news because we have, given Iran's recent election where Ibrahim Raisi is the quote-unquote democratically elected, we're skeptical, actually we know that's not the case, president of Iran. His election to that position has brought a lot of international attention to the crimes that happened in 1988 that were kind of hidden under the rug in a way for many decades, in which the government of Iran did mass murders of political prisoners who were part of an organization that go by the initials MEK. And I wanted to cover this because we were talking about this before and how there hasn't been much justice or attention surrounding these crimes. And this is kind of, it's coming around, it's starting, people are starting to think about it. It's starting to happen. I also wanted to take a moment to highlight what MEK is and the dynamics of that. But Armin, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the most, so we're talking about the executions that happen in Iran by the government. This is one of the most ignored mass executions in modern history. The numbers are very hard to come by, but it's somewhere like the range of what it could be is so wide, but it could be between I think 4,000 to 30,000, right? Most people usually cite the ones that are close to 30,000, but in just, I don't know, a very small amount of time, like most of it happening within within a year or two. But these were mass executions without any due process, any court hearing, any access to lawyers. And it's just like, mass executions that have happened like this in modern history have become major topics of, human rights violations and have gotten a lot of coverage. And people know about them, like people refer to them constantly in, when it comes to human rights violations. But this one just didn't get the attention that it deserves, right? And so many people died. Okay. And I know a lot of people, so another thing is that, oh yeah, so the reason why Susanna is mentioning Gracie is because this is now getting attention for two reasons. One, the new president of Iran was on the Death Council. That's the actual name of it, by the way, that Khomeini picked to carry out these executions, right? So he was one of the few members of the Death Council. So he was the current president right now was directly responsible for these mass executions in the 1980s. And also, I think it's a coincidence that these two are happening at the same time. The new president and this guy now in, where was it? What country is this? that he's getting in Sweden.
Sweden. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this guy was also responsible for these executions, and now he's getting. This is correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is the first and only person that has ever faced legal consequences for, like, this is the first time ever anywhere in the world where these mass executions in the 1980s is now being investigated and criminally, somebody's being criminally charged for them after
On the
so long.
international stage.
Yeah, this is like new, and that's why those mass executions in the 1980s are now getting a lot more attention, right, than compared to before. Like, this was like a lot of human rights activists were desperate for this, for one day this getting some sunlight, right? This mass executions that just seemed like people just like, oh yeah, we had like 30,000 people were mass executed in Iran over like 2 years or something, and just like nobody knows about this. No, like, how many people in the life should even knew about this? So this is a major mass execution in modern history, and people are just like, oh yeah, I don't know.
I didn't know about it before IEC.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
So now people are like, fine, like people are like, now that Raisi is the president, people are like, okay, this is our chance. This is our chance to bring attention to this. And now this happened. So a lot of human rights activists are like, finally, like some attention. But yeah, you wanted to mention something?
So to be clear, it is kind of a coincidence. He was first arrested for his involvement. He was arrested in Sweden in November 2019. And technically, like I said, he's not officially named. It's just kind of like the press has figured out who they're referring to. And so Raisi is kind of who was on this death panel, and he was kind of one of these prosecutors. And so he is charged with being an assistant to the deputy prosecutor in one of these prisons. And what I wanted to talk about was a large number of the people who were victims of these mass executions were members of a group that go by the initials MEK, like I was saying. And it's important to highlight the persecution of people from dissident groups in particular, because the MEK is a dissident group. It's like if Islam and communism had a baby. So it's a horrible group, horrible ideology, and it is a radical group. It is a group that has done attacks, okay? Horrible attacks, horrific crimes, right? That doesn't mean that every member who was a victim of the thought reform and cultic destructive ideology of this group committed those crimes. But it's a similar situation that I was talking about with the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, where as the new Iranian regime was coming into power, trying to establish and secure its power after the Iranian Revolution, they couldn't deal with any potential threats to their power, right? So they just went way overboard with taking out these people. And it's a massive abuse, regardless of the fact that the people in these groups may have had really bad destructive ideas, right? So I want to make that distinction very clear. And it again falls into the pattern of they served and they still serve as a threat to the current regime because their ideology and belief and commitment to their ideology is so strong that they are not willing to or able to fall in line with the current authoritarian regime and any given leader, right? So they're persecuted very heavily. But it's one of those instances where you have to be very careful in threading the needle of saying, like, yes, these people are definitely victims. In this case, 100%. That doesn't mean that we endorse what they believe in, and it shouldn't be endorsed. So it's very important to make that distinction.
All right. So I just want to, for people who, when you hear executions, people usually don't imagine what we mean. So let's say So the estimations were that the numbers exceeded 30,000 people who were executed, right? And the way that it was done, I'm just going to read this. Because of the large numbers, prisoners were loaded into forklift trucks in groups of 6 and hanged from cranes in half-hour intervals. So just non-stop trucks would come in like a factory line. It was 6 at a time, hang half an hour, every half an hour, non-stop. They were hanging 6 people at a time. So this was until they reached like 30,000. So that happened. And by the way, remember that the way that Iran hangs people is not, they don't drop them for the neck to break. So they don't die right away. They lift them. So they die suffocating very slowly. It's a really bad way to go.
I wouldn't be surprised if there were a great number of people who didn't even expire within that 30 minutes and had. It's one of the most barbaric ways to execute people. Period.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. There are some people who chewed at their tongue from pressure while they were being hung. Like, when you think about the Wild Wild West, that was the way that they kill people was extremely humane compared to how they do it now in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Like when you watch movies in the Wild Wild West, when people are getting hanged, you see a trapdoor behind them just open and they fall. They die immediately. They don't feel pain. Unlike in Iran, where they, just like put the rope and just slowly lift you. I go, why do you are you guys sadistic? Like, why does this, guys?
Clearly,
this is why I'm telling you. Yeah,
it's not even Islamic.
Yeah, the Islamic Republic of Iran is worse than Islam. The way they do is execution in Iran, people are like, oh my God, this is horrible. This is what Islam gets you. This is actually worse than Islam, because in Islam, executions are done with cutting, with the sharp sword, by the cutting of the head, and it's supposed to be in one cut. Like you can't, it's not right if you have to do it in 2. It has to be one cut. So that's like the most, not a painful way to go. Islamic Republic of Iran, they say we're not going to do the Islamic way. We're going to actually go more sadistic when it comes to our executions. We want to make sure our people die slowly. So
it's also
go
it's to cause terror among the public as well. To know that it's as painful and barbaric as possible. It's a mechanism of control and terror.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
We can clap for the next news.
But here somebody was saying stoning to death is far worse. Yeah, but that doesn't happen as much.
And stoning to death is a very specific prescription for very specific crimes.
Yeah, and it's also but that the numbers for that is very low. But beheading is in Saudi Arabia happens often, and hanging in Iran happens very often, very often. In fact, per capita, Iran is the number 1 country in the world when it comes to the number of executions, if you adjust for population. Mm-hmm. And if you don't adjust for population, it's number 2, China being number 1. So number 2 in total numbers, even though they're not as populated as many other countries, but number 1 per capita. So when it comes to number of executions, Iran being number 2 in the world, given that the way they carry out the executions, that's imagine just how many people are just being tortured to death. Anyways.
Hey guys, if you're a fan of Blasphemy and Sexy Callie, like me, then you need to be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, link in the description below. Because if you subscribe, we will send you a free copy of our Blasphemous Art ebook. And let me tell you, it is the tastiest blasphemy that you can find anywhere available today. And we are so generous with our blasphemy that we continue to send you more blasphemy every week. So make sure to subscribe, link in the description below.